October 1st, 2025. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast, a space for conversation and reflection where we explore current affairs in El Salvador and the world together. Search for this podcast on Pandora, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Noticias El Salvador SV, and you'll find many options. Or search for us on your favorite platform. You're sure to find us. The PayPal link can be found in the description. The username is PayPal2025-186, all united. PayPal2025-186. It's in the content description of this podcast. Your contribution, no matter how little it is, helps us stay connected in the cloud and provide content. Follow us, share, and comment.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're really tackling a lot. Our mission is to synthesize the biggest, most impactful headlines from, today, October 1st, and also yesterday, September 30th, 2025. The picture we're getting is pretty complex. My nation planning this massive fiscal future while also grappling with the fallout from its past.
It really is a study in contrast, isn't it? I mean, on one side, you've got this huge $10.5 billion national budget being dissected. That's clearly about planning, ambition, looking forward, right?
Then, on the other hand, you have these really definitive judicial rulings landing. We're talking decades-long sentences for, high-profile political figures, even media figures, tied to decisions made years back during that whole era of gang negotiations.
Exactly. So we're shifting from spreadsheets and GDP growth straight into maximum security prison sentences. It's jarring. And then you layer on top of that a full U.S. government shutdown, these severe weather alerts hitting home, demanding, national preparedness, and even, frankly, a shameful disciplinary action against the national football team.
Yeah, it's a packed couple of days.
It is. And this deep dive feels necessary because without context, these major events just feel like, noise. Our goal here is to give you, the listener, that leverage of understanding what truly matters. So let's unpack this. Let's start immediately with those colossal numbers shaping El Salvador's near future.
Okay, so the anchor story domestically has to be the unveiling of the 2026 General Budget Project. This was presented by the Minister of Hacienda, Yerson Posada. And the scale is historically significant. The proposed budget for 2026 is set at $10,555.6 million.
$10.5 billion. Wow. Just to put that into perspective, what kind of growth does that actually represent? And what does it signal about maybe the state's capacity right now?
Well, it definitely reflects substantial optimism, maybe increased fiscal capacity too. This proposal is an increase of $892 million when you compare it to the budget approved for 2025.
So almost $900 million more.
Exactly. And that scale of spending, it positions the government to, undertake pretty significant projects and maintain its current operational strategies without, let's say, immediate constraint. Now, crucially, Minister Posada paired this unveiling with a very specific and politically sensitive promise. He promised that the government will not use debt instruments to finance current expenditure. Now, that's a cornerstone commitment. It's designed to signal fiscal responsibility, sustainability, both to international partners and local markets.
Okay, that no debt for current expenditure promise sounds good on paper, okay? But if we actually dive into the allocations, where are the political priorities being signaled? I mean, where's the big money concentrated in this $10.5 billion pie?
The priorities seem pretty consistent with the current agenda. Education, health, security, and defense. They collectively concentrate 36.8% of the entire budget. That totals about $3,886.9 million.
So over a third right there.
A huge chunk.
Yeah.
It underscores this continued centralization of resources towards, social services and perhaps most notably, the ongoing security strategy.
Now, I want to dig into a bit of political nuance here, particularly regarding education. You said the overall budget's up by almost $900 million. Yet the specific budget for the Ministry of Education is actually set at $1,540.4 million. That's $15.7 million less than what was planned for 2025. Now, that seems counterintuitive when the total pot of money has grown so much. What does that specific cut, even if it's relatively small in the grand scheme, tell us about maybe the government's operational focus?
Yeah, that small cut is actually a massive analytical point. When a government boosts its budget by nearly $1 billion, but then specifically reduces funding for a critical social ministry like education, It suggests a strategic reallocation. It's not necessarily saying education is being deprioritized entirely,
Right.
but maybe certain educational programs, perhaps operational costs, maybe administrative bloat, are being trimmed to redirect funds somewhere else. And given the economic drivers we'll probably talk about shortly, especially construction, it could suggest resources are shifting toward infrastructure projects, or perhaps further beefing up the security apparatus, which falls under those defense and security allocations that are definitely not shrinking.
Right, that makes sense. And what about higher education? Was the budget specific about funding for the university?
Yes, it was. The proposal assigns $116.5 million to the Universidad de El Salvador, the UES, for 2026. That level of support for the national university system, well, it's often maintained. It acts as a bit of a political stabilizer, and it's seen as a necessary investment in human capital, even while, primary and secondary education might face slight allocation pressures.
Okay, speaking of human capital, before we get too carried away about the future budget, we really have to address this fundamental structural vulnerability, the pension system. I mean, this is a liability that just absolutely dwarfs the annual budget, doesn't it?
It really is the elephant in the room. Every Minister of Hacienda has to confront it. Analysis, especially that 2020 actuarial study and subsequent financial reviews, confirms that the actuarial deficit of the pension system, that's the gap between what the system owes and its future income, could exceed an astonishing $25,000 million.
$25 billion. Okay, that's 2.5 times the size of the entire 2026 budget we're talking about. How does a liability that massive immediately complicate Minister Posado's promise not to use debt for current operations? I mean, does it?
It introduces an immediate and frankly chronic risk factor. So while he promises no debt for current expenditure, the pension system itself requires continuous heavy injections from the state budget just to stay afloat.
Right, to pay current retirees.
Exactly. So the government has to continually pump capital in. Now, while that injection isn't technically debt for current expenditure, it acts as this massive drain on operational cash flow. It limits the government's ability to allocate resources to new projects. Every dollar spent propping up the pension deficit is a dollar that can't go to, say, healthcare, education, infrastructure. It's a long-term fiscal constraint that constantly threatens to destabilize the budget, really regardless of positive GDP growth.
And what's the history here? I mean, how has the system been managed or struggled over the years?
Well, we can look at the minimum pension guarantee. It's actually risen 8 times in the last 25 years.
8 times?
Yeah, which reflects, a political and social necessity. You need to ensure older Salvadorans can afford to live. But each increase exponentially grows that actuarial deficit. We also remember policy suggestions from bodies like the IMF back in 2021. They were trying to tackle this exact sustainability problem. And they suggested things like increasing the retirement age, particularly for women who often have different workforce participation patterns than men. Of course, measures like that are deeply unpopular, but they reflect the dire financial need to somehow manage that $25 billion gap.
So, okay, we have this growing budget. It seems based on pretty good near-term economic signs. What exactly is driving the revenue growth that allows for this budget increase?
Well, the economic health check does reveal some positives. Tributary income, so taxes, maintains a pretty substantial 8.1% growth. It successfully surpassed $5,500 million. That high compliance rate suggests robust economic activity, maybe effective tax collection policies too.
Okay.
And most notably, the Salvadoran GDP grew by a healthy 4.1% in the second quarter of 2025. The reports clearly indicate that this performance was driven significantly by the construction sector.
Construction. Okay, that makes sense. Big infrastructure projects, they generate revenue, jobs, investment. But if the economy is relying so heavily on construction for a 4.1% GDP bump, how sustainable is that growth? Once the major projects currently announced are finished.
That really is the critical question for the long-term outlook, isn't it? Construction-led growth, it's often cyclical. It's effective in the short to medium term, generates jobs, immediate tax revenue, but true long-term sustainability, that really relies on diversifying the economy, boosting exports, increasing foreign direct investment outside of just infrastructure. Right now, the sources point strongly to construction as the primary engine. If the government's strategy is sound, maybe they're using the revenue from this construction boom to finance structural reforms, perhaps address liabilities like that pension deficit we talked about, though honestly that remains the ultimate hurdle.
Okay, so we've planned for the 2026 budget, but like you said earlier, that planning is happening against this backdrop of, well, historic judicial accountability. Let's look at how the past is finally catching up with some political figures. We're shifting from future debt concerns to immediate sentences. And this section seems dominated by these high-stakes Pandias trials.
Yeah, these are absolutely landmark condemnations. They fundamentally reshape the historical narrative of the state's relationship with gangs. The big headline-grabbing news from September 30th was the sentencing of two really high-profile figures. First, ex-deputy Benito Lara. He's formerly of the FMLN party, the Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front. He was condemned to a definitive sentence of 28 years in prison.
28 years. And the specific charge here is crucial, right? It's agrupaciones ilícitas, illegal association. And this stems from his involvement in negotiating with these organized criminal groups. Can you maybe contextualize why that charge tied to old negotiations carries such a heavy sentence now?
Well, it's heavy because the prosecution successfully argued that these negotiations fundamentally compromised the state and actually benefited the criminal organizations. Lara's conviction relates specifically to actions during his political career, where he allegedly, engaged in dialogue and provided benefits or concessions to the gangs, perhaps in exchange for political or electoral gain. In the current judicial climate, which is intensely focused on dismantling all gang infrastructure,
Right.
past political engagement with Pandias is being treated with the utmost severity. It's essentially being defined as collaboration with terrorism or organized crime.
Okay. Now, Lara's immediate reaction, we saw, was to frame this whole thing as part of a political persecution. Is that claim gaining any traction? Or how is it being received?
It is gaining some traction, particularly among certain opposition groups and organizations that support political prisoners. Lara is appealing the sentence, naturally. And organizations like COFAPIs, that's the Committee of Families of Political Prisoners of El Salvador, and some other political leaders, they publicly labeled the condemnation as political persecution.
Okay.
The argument basically hinges on the idea that these historical actions, which, were arguably sanctioned or maybe ignored by previous administrations, are now being selectively prosecuted for political ends under the current security regime. The tension here is immense. Is this justice finally delivered? Or is it political score settling? The court's made its ruling, but that political debate is definitely going to continue.
And who else was convicted alongside Lara in this same process? And what's the significance, maybe, of grouping these figures together legally?
Well, it highlights that the prosecution was perhaps aiming for accountability across the political spectrum. In that same case, former San Salvador Mayor Ernesto Muchant was also condemned. He received an 18-year sentence. Now, Muchant, unlike Lara, comes from the political right, from Arena.
Right.
So the prosecution successfully linked figures from historically opposing political parties under this umbrella of essentially using the same criminal organizations for electoral advantage. And then there's the third figure, journalist and ex-columnist Paulo Luz. He also received a staggering sentence, 28 years for the same crime, agrupaciones ilícitas.
Paulo Luz, a prominent journalist, a media figure, getting 28 years for this charge. That sends a huge signal, doesn't it, about who the state believes was complicit?
Absolutely. Luz was a longtime columnist, and he played a role, reportedly, in facilitating some of the dialogue that happened during the 2014 and 2015 election cycles. Sentencing a journalist for this charge, it's an enormous moment. It suggests the court is viewing anyone involved in that transactional relationship with the gangs, whether politician, intermediary, facilitator, as equally culpable under the current law, which is aimed at completely stamping out gang presence. These specific condemnations, they serve as a powerful warning. No figure from that era, regardless of their previous stature, seems immune from prosecution now.
And while the courts were dealing with this historical political crime, they were also handing down massive sentences for, well, the most severe kinds of street violence, right?
That's a vital point to note. The judicial system appears to be simultaneously addressing high-level corruption and heinous immediate crime. We saw the Fifth Sentencing Tribunal of San Salvador condemn Ayrton Ricardo Villalta Vargas to a colossal 82 years in prison.
82 years.
Yes, for a quadruple homicide. It reflects this judicial determination to remove the most violent offenders from society for, well, virtually the rest of their lives. Separately, down in Usulatan, a man received 24 years for the violation and trafficking of a 6-year-old girl. These sentences, they really reinforce that narrative of total zero-tolerance accountability for violent crime.
And this judicial intensity, it seems clearly supported by regional security cooperation efforts. What did the news report about actions across the border?
Yeah, we saw significant movement on the border with Guatemala. Guatemala successfully expelled a Salvadoran gang member known as alias El Colocho. And this isn't just a one-off. It adds to a total of 36 expulsions that Guatemala has carried out in 2025 alone.
Wow, 36 already this year.
It really illustrates the tight coordination between regional security forces. They're aiming to prevent gang members from seeking refuge across borders. And in a separate action, Guatemala also extradited an entrepreneur who was wanted by El Salvador to face charges for aggravated theft. The message seems clear. There's virtually no safe haven remaining within Central America for those sought by Salvadoran authorities.
And all of this feeds into that broader security narrative we keep hearing. We heard a specific claim recently that El Salvador is now safer than Canada. What's the source and context for that kind of assertion?
That claim came from a prominent analyst who supports the current policies. They attribute the perceived and honestly measurable drop in violence and homicide rates, which leads to these bold comparisons with countries like Canada, to what they termed the assertive, correct, and constitutional policy implemented by the government. These high-profile condemnations, the expulsions we just mentioned, they're presented as continuous as evidence that this policy, centered on mass arrests and stringent judicial action, is achieving, well, unprecedented levels of public safety and institutional accountability.
October 1st, 2025. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast, a space for conversation and reflection where we explore current affairs in El Salvador and the world together. Search for this podcast on Pandora, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Noticias El Salvador SV, and you'll find many options. Or search for us on your favorite platform, you're sure to find us. The PayPal link can be found in the description. The username is PayPal2025-186, all united, PayPal2025-186. It's in the content description of this podcast. Your contribution, no matter how little it is, helps us stay connected in the cloud and provide content. Follow us, share, and comment. Okay, as we broaden our view now to the global stage, the big news is dominated by instability in the world's largest economy, the United States. We've actually entered a U.S. government shutdown.
Yeah, this is a pretty significant geopolitical event, mainly because it's the first U.S. government shutdown in nearly 7 years. It was triggered by, well, a lack of agreement between Donald Trump and Congress on budget appropriations. This kind of political deadlock paralyzes non-essential government functions.
Okay, so for our listeners, what are the immediate sort of tangible implications of a U.S. shutdown, particularly for Salvadorans who rely on U.S. services or maybe have family connections there?
Well, the primary immediate concern is always the uncertainty around consular services.
Yeah.
The U.S. Embassy in El Salvador moved quickly to try and manage expectations. They stated that the visa issuance process will continue, but, and this is the key phrase, only as long as the situation allows.
Okay, so hedging.
Exactly. That hedging means appointments could suddenly be canceled, processing times could stretch out, or essential immigration services can just freeze without warning. That causes immense anxiety for people traveling, seeking asylum, dealing with family reunification. And furthermore, if the shutdown drags on, it could affect things like remittance processing and other economic services, potentially slowing the flow of vital foreign currency back home.
Right. And while he's sort of driving the shutdown, Donald Trump is simultaneously advancing his, let's say, unique political agenda with some pretty attention-grabbing proposals.
He certainly is. Among the most discussed proposals was the idea of using dangerous cities within the U.S. as actual training camps for the military.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, it blends domestic security issues with a very strong militaristic approach. On a completely different note, he also proposed resurrecting old armored battleships for naval defense, kind of retro. However, he also presented a policy that directly impacts the migrant community. A plan to resume accepting new registrations for DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. So, a real mix of policies there.
Definitely a mix.
Good.
Now, shifting away from the current political drama, we saw a former administration figure making waves with an upcoming book release.
That would be former Vice President Kamala Harris. She's apparently detailing the events surrounding her 2024 electoral defeat against Donald Trump in a new memoir. These kinds of books, they often provide critical, sometimes controversial insider perspectives on campaign strategies, internal party politics, and just the broader challenges facing U.S. political campaigns these days.
Okay, now we absolutely must focus on a tragedy with immense local impact here. The confirmation of a second death following that devastating shooting at the ICE Center in Dallas.
Yes, this is truly heartbreaking news, and it hits very close to home for many. Authorities confirmed that a second immigrant sadly succumbed to their injuries following that incident at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Center in Dallas, Texas. ICE then officially confirmed the identity of the deceased man as a Salvadoran citizen.
Such a tragedy. It just highlights the immense risks and ultimately the terrible consequences faced by those seeking better lives abroad. What details emerged about the victim and his family?
Well, the reports included some deeply moving accounts from the victim's mother. She was quoted expressing her profound grief, saying simply, "He had told us that he would soon return."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that single quote just encapsulates so much, doesn't it? The hopeful promises, the harsh realities of the migrant experience, that expectation of a brief separation turning into just permanent loss.
Absolutely devastating. In the face of that tragedy, how is the community responding? Is there support for the family?
Yes, the community response seems to have been immediate and focused on providing practical financial support. Campaigns were organized, including a GoFundMe page, specifically to cover the huge cost of repatriating the body back to El Salvador for burial. A local phone number, 7612-3199, was also made public for people who wanted to make direct contributions. It's a powerful, if somber, example of the Salvadoran diaspora rallying around one of their own during an unimaginable crisis.
Definitely. Okay, finally, just a quick look at other major international incidents reported in the last, say, 24 hours or so.
Right. We had some tension in the Middle East surrounding the Flotilla Samud, which is a sea convoy intended to break a blockade. The flotilla denounced what it described as an intimidatory operation carried out by Israeli forces. This diplomatic incident drew an international reaction, notably a Spanish minister subsequently calling for responsibility from all parties involved regarding the situation. Separately, nature delivered a major warning in the Pacific. A magnitude 6.7 earthquake shook the Philippines. That prompted localized tsunami alerts.
Wow.
And tragically, in Mexico City, a famous celebrity stylist, known for working with artists and singers, was assassinated. This adds to ongoing concerns there about violence targeting high-profile public figures.
All right, let's turn to the world of sport now. The news brought plenty of excitement, but also a significant and, let's be honest, embarrassing disciplinary action from FIFA aimed directly at the Salvadoran Football Federation, SEFU.
Yeah, this is a deep cut for Salvadoran football fans and maybe society at large. FIFA sanctioned SU with a pretty substantial $50,000 CHF fine, that's Swiss francs. And the reason? Racist shouts and behavior from the crowd during that recent match against Suriname. This wasn't just a monetary slap on the wrist either. The consequences are physical and immediate.
Okay, what are those specific physical consequences? How does it affect the national team's upcoming games?
Well, FIFA ordered a non-negotiable reduction in the capacity at the Cuscatlán Stadium for the upcoming and very critical World Cup qualifying match against Panama. Reducing the crowd size. That means sacrificing some home field advantage, obviously reducing ticket revenue, and it sends this highly visible signal about intolerance.
Diario El Mundo called it a shameful wake-up call. What was the specific editorial point they were making about why this sanction was necessary?
The editorial was really unambiguous. It directly addressed the Salvadoran fan base and society more broadly, arguing that the incident was a stain on the country's reputation. They called it that shameful wake-up call. The paper basically emphasized that true patriotism requires being a dignified host country that respects rivals unconditionally, regardless of their origin or skin color. It was a societal critique, really emphasizing that passion for football absolutely cannot be an excuse for hateful behavior. And the incident has now sparked this necessary local discussion about whether players within the Salvadoran league itself also face racism on the field during domestic matches. It's opened up a conversation.
Despite the sanction, though, fan enthusiasm for the national team, La Selecta, seems incredibly high as they get ready for these 2026 World Cup qualifiers.
Oh, absolutely. The passion is definitely undimmed. La Selecta is deep in training for these crucial double qualifying matches against Panama and then Guatemala. And despite that forthcoming reduction in capacity, the demand for tickets was just explosive. Tickets for 3 sections for the El Salvador versus Panama match sold out in under 2 hours.
Under 2 hours, wow.
Yeah, that astonishing speed just demonstrates the huge national investment of hope in the team's qualification chances.
Were there any specific personnel updates coming out of the recent training sessions for La Selecta? Any key players in or out?
Yes, there were a few notes. In the second training session, Christian Martinez emerged as the main surprise, maybe indicating he's training for a significant role in the starting lineup. On the downside, Henry Romero was absent due to ongoing knee discomfort, which is always a worry for the defense.
Yeah.
And on the development side, Gabriel de Azevedo has arrived and joined the sub-20 national team, so signaling a focus on future talent pipeline.
Okay. Now, zooming out to the European game, the Champions League fixtures reported yesterday delivered some pretty spectacular scorelines, didn't they?
It was a great day for football across the continent.
Yeah.
Real Madrid delivered an absolute thrashing to their opponents over in Kazakhstan. The standout performance really belonged to French superstar Kylian Mbappe. He scored a decisive hat-trick, just demonstrating his lethal form right now. Meanwhile, back in Spain, Atletico de Madrid secured a solid victory at home against Eintracht de Frankfurt.
And what about the biggest upsets or maybe surprises of the day?
Well, the largest upset probably involved Galatasaray. They managed to defeat European giants Liverpool. The deciding moment came from a penalty scored by Victor Osimhen. Elsewhere, Bayern Munich made pretty short work of their fixture, defeating Pafos 1-5. They essentially resolved the match early and took control of the group. And finally, we had that dramatic return of Jose Mourinho to Stamford Bridge. His former club Chelsea managed to spoil his day, winning the match thanks to an own goal scored by Richard Rios.
Ouch, an own goal decider. Okay, beyond football, the combat sports world saw a huge title shakeup as well. That's right, in boxing, the big news was dominated by a major upset. The undefeated boxer Terence Crawford shocked the fighting world. He defeated the highly favored Canelo Alvarez by unanimous decision. That result really settles, or even reignites, a massive debate in boxing about pound-for-pound supremacy.
Big news for boxing fans.
Definitely. And on the domestic sporting front, a bit of good news. 3 Salvadoran shooters successfully qualified for the 2026 Central American and Caribbean Games, which are set to take place in Santo Domingo. So that's a strong start to the country's qualification cycle for those games.
All right, shifting back home now. The weather has really demanded national attention, hasn't it? It's pushed the country into this state of heightened preparedness because of heavy rains.
Yeah, the risks have become severe enough that the General Directorate of Protection Civil issued a national yellow alert, an alerta amarilla, on Tuesday, September 30th. This elevated alert level, it's a direct response to the increasing intensity of the rains across El Salvador. And MR, that's the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, is forecasting intense storms for Wednesday afternoon and evening in various zones. They're anticipating the potential for urban flooding and even river overflows.
And the statistics on rainfall we've seen are particularly alarming, aren't they? They kind of explain why the ground is just so vulnerable right now.
They absolutely paint a picture of saturation. Get this. El Salvador has already reached 92% of the total rainfall expected for the entirety of 2025.
92% already? Wow.
Yeah, so when the ground is 92% saturated, any new rain just immediately translates into runoff. That significantly increases the risk of landslides, flash floods, and river desbordamiento, the overflows.
And we've already seen the consequences of the saturation playing out in different areas, right?
We have, unfortunately. The rains have already caused immediate evacuations in several critical areas, notably La Union and San Francisco Gotera. Both experienced significant river overflow, threatening homes and infrastructure. Damages have also been reported over in Ahuachapan. Authorities are, continuing to manage contingency plans, but that yellow alert confirms they anticipate conditions will likely worsen before they get better.
Okay. On a completely different note, then, there's a major announcement about a long-anticipated urban infrastructure project, one that aims to modernize public transport, the San Salvador Metro Cable.
Yes, this is a really significant step, potentially, towards improving connectivity and reducing traffic congestion in the capital area. The Ministry of Public Works, MOP, announced that the San Salvador Metro Cable project will officially begin construction this month, in October.
Okay, so it's actually starting.
It seems so. This project involves a significant investment in cable car technology aimed at moving people quickly over congested urban areas. The Minister of Public Works confirmed the civil works are about to start, and the entire project is expected to take about 18 months to complete. It represents, a modern solution to that perennial problem of urban sprawl and traffic jams in San Salvador.
Right. And while the MOP is handling the massive Metro Cable project, the VMT, the Vice Ministry of Transport, they're looking at smaller, but maybe culturally interesting, changes to transportation.
That's right. The VMT is apparently evaluating a gradual transition towards personalized license plates. This is pretty common internationally, right? Allowing drivers to customize their plates, usually for an extra fee. The discussion has included possibilities like allowing citizens to put a nickname, maybe something like El Bicho, on a plate.
Okay.
Though they stressed this is still strictly in the evaluation phase for a gradual transition. They recognize the logistical complexities involved in rolling out personalized plates.
Sure. Now, unfortunately, we have to end this domestic section with reports of tragic incidents, specifically involving traffic and, well, dangerous driving.
Sadly, yes. The last 24 hours saw several fatal accidents reported. In Ciudad Delgado, a man died after tragically falling from the bed of a pickup truck while the vehicle was actually in motion.
No.
And even more disturbing, a woman was fatally run over on the Toncal del Norte. The driver failed to stop and immediately fled the scene, just left her there. Authorities are currently searching for that perpetrator.
Awful. And the capture of yet another extremely dangerous driver really highlights this chronic problem of driving under the influence, doesn't it?
It really does. A driver was captured over in Sonsonet following a collision. They were found to have an astonishing 223 degrees of alcohol in their system. Now, to provide some context, while local measurement standards can vary, 223 degrees typically signifies a level of intoxication several times higher than the legal limit. It reflects extreme impairment.
Unbelievable.
And this single incident contributes to that alarming statistic we keep hearing. There have already been over 1,600 captures for dangerous driving in 2025 alone. It just underscores the massive public safety risk posed by intoxicated drivers on the roads.
Okay, let's end our deep dive today with a brief but interesting look at the entertainment and culture world, starting with a major Hollywood split that caught some attention.
Yeah, the celebrity headlines were kind of dominated by the end of a pretty long-standing Hollywood marriage. Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce from her husband, the musician Keith Urban, after 19 years of marriage.
19 years, wow. Were there any reported reasons for the separation after nearly 2 decades together?
Well, the reports suggest the split was initiated by Urban. He reportedly stated he was just no longer happy in the relationship. Interestingly, though, the reports also indicate that Kidman herself didn't want the divorce and had actually sought reconciliation. But ultimately, she was the one who presented the legal request to the tribunal, finalizing the separation.
Okay. From personal splits to legal disputes, a legendary rock band is facing a lawsuit.
That would be the Rolling Stones. They're apparently being sued for alleged plagiarism. Now, this specific song and the claimant details weren't fully disclosed in the initial reports we saw, but any legal challenge against a band with such a long and iconic history, it always generates immense legal and cultural tension.
Absolutely. Finally, we have some very exciting cultural announcements, both for global fans and local pride as well.
Yeah, huge news for music fans worldwide. Bad Bunny has been confirmed as the headline star for the highly anticipated Super Bowl 2026 halftime show. That's always a massive platform. And locally, there's immense pride, as Los Hermanos Flores are set to make history. They're poised to become the first Salvadoran band ever to perform the renowned Coachella Music Festival out in California. That really cements their international status.
That's fantastic news for them and for Salvadoran music. And for classic football fans, El Salvador is apparently going to host a truly dream fixture.
Yes, it was announced that El Salvador will be the site for a classic match of legends, a face-off between the legendary teams of Real Madrid versus Barcelona. This promises to be a really nostalgic treat for local football enthusiasts, bringing some world-class legends to Central America.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does it all mean? We started with the immense scale of that new $10.5 billion budget. We noted those internal political choices like the slight cut to education spending, which kind of sets the fiscal tone for 2026. This forward-looking financial plan, though, operates against the immediate backdrop of historic judicial accountability. That's evidenced by those 28-year condemnations handed down to Benito Lara and Paulo Luers for past gang negotiations. And we certainly can't ignore the real-world consequences, both emotional and institutional, from the tragic death of the Salvadoran immigrant in Dallas to the serious disciplinary fallout from the FIFA sanction imposing that reduced capacity on the national team's stadium due to racism. You, the listener, should now have the essential contextual knowledge to understand the biggest stories defining El Salvador and the world this week.
Yeah, and if we try to connect all these threads, right, the staggering, $25 billion pension liability, the ongoing security narrative, these judicial outcomes, it really raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. Given the current judicial and political climate, particularly that assertion of political persecution, coming from condemned figures like Benito Lara and his supporters, how should society fundamentally balance that push for institutional accountability for past crimes against the equally vital necessity of ensuring due process and, crucially, avoiding the politicization of the legal system? It's a tension, isn't it,
between accountability and legitimacy, and it remains absolutely central to understanding the region's trajectory moving forward.
October 1st, 2025. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast, a space for conversation and reflection where we explore current affairs in El Salvador and the world together. Search for this podcast on Pandora, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google, Noticias El Salvador SV, and you'll find many options. Or search for us on your favorite platform, you're sure to find us. The PayPal link can be found in the description. The username is PayPal2025186, all united, PayPal2025186. It's in the content description of this podcast. Your contribution, no matter how little it is, helps us stay connected to the cloud and provide content. Follow us, share, and